Josh brought his mother out in a wheelchair onto the stairwell. "I'll be quick, Mum. Just need to grab my jacket and we'll go." Helen nodded and smiled, saying, "Don't rush. The weather is beautiful and the evening is just beginning. We'll have time for a walk." She wanted to say more, but at that moment Sarah, the nosy neighbour who knew everything that happened in the apartment building, appeared from the neighbouring apartment. It was impossible to hide from her curious eyes, and all the neighbours had resigned themselves to this. Helen also knew that it was almost impossible to escape from the ubiquitous Sarah, and prepared herself for questioning. "Well, Helen, are you going for a walk or to the hospital?" asked Sarah. "What hospital at this hour?" Helen shrugged. "It's already evening. Josh just got back from work and suggested we take a walk." "Well, well," nodded Sarah. "Your son is really something. Everyone should have a son like him. He didn't abandon you. He takes care of you and earns good money. And my good-for-nothing son only learned how to hang out with his buddies. And you know that this won't lead to anything good. I've told him so many times, used you as an example, but he doesn't care. And if something happened to me, he wouldn't lift a finger. I feel like the nursing home is going to be my home in my old age." "Stop it, please." Helen tried to calm her neighbour. "Everything will be fine for you." "Okay, sorry for complaining," Sarah said, and then perked up. "When is your Josh getting married? Why do you keep him tied to your wheelchair all the time? He's a good guy, and you've tied him to your wheelchair. It's not good, Helen. He needs to start his own family and have children." At that moment, Josh emerged onto the stairwell with a warm blanket in his hands. He had heard the neighbour's last words and frowned. "Ah, Sarah, good evening. Let us figure out how we live our lives." He sat down in front of his mother and carefully wrapped her feet. Then he smiled and said, "So, are we going?" "We're off," Helen laughed, no longer paying attention to the neighbour. Sarah, snorting contemptuously and muttering something under her breath, disappeared behind her own door. Helen silently gazed at the yellowing maples in the alley for a while, then turned to her son and said, "Josh, but our neighbour is right. You have no personal life because of me. You don't go anywhere or meet any girls. It's time for you to get married." Josh smiled at his mother and said, "Mum, maybe it's just not my time yet. I don't want to get married just to have a wife. I want to love and be loved truly, you know, in sorrow and in joy." Helen didn't respond and just sighed softly. Once upon a time she had dreamed of this herself, and after meeting the handsome Harris, she had fallen madly in love with him. He knew how to court her beautifully, was the soul of any company, loved to make people laugh, and did so infectiously that everyone around him started to smile. "Why do you need this chatterbox?" Helen's mother worried when her daughter told her about the upcoming wedding. "He's like an empty box, pretty on the outside, but there's nothing inside." "Mum," Helen protested, "how can you say that? Harris isn't like that. He's cheerful and kind, and he loves me very much, and we will definitely get married." "Yes, please get married. Who's stopping you?" her mother shrugged. "But just don't regret it later. Life is long and complicated. Candy and flowers are only temporary things, and often love disappears with them, if it wasn't real, of course." "Mum, why do you say that?" "Because I've lived enough, and I know this life from different sides. And I see people under a microscope. Of course, God forbid that I'm wrong, but still, your Harris is not a reliable guy." Helen only waved at her mother's words, and soon she and Harris became husband and wife. The first years of their life together were the happiest for Helen, but gradually she began to notice that Harris was not as perfect as she had thought. Helen was particularly unhappy with her husband's frequent meetings with his friends on various occasions. When she told him about it, Harris retorted, "You're acting like an old woman. Relax, we're young and should make the most of life. Tomorrow is Ben's birthday, and all my friends are going to his summer house. They're expecting us too." Helen pointed to her belly and said, "Where should I go? I'm going into labour in 2 weeks. I don't want anything to happen." Harris frowned and said, "You're always complaining and thinking of bad things. Okay, I won't go. Do you feel better?" "No, I don't feel better," Helen replied. "I just want to be with you. You know how worried I am. After all, this is our first child together." "All right." Harris finally agreed, with great upset on his face. "My father told me not to hurry into the wedding and have a good time, but I, just like a fool, didn't listen to him. Now I'm sitting near your skirt." Helen looked at her husband, who looked so unhappy and hurt that she involuntarily smiled. "Well, you're like a child. All right, Harris, go yourself. Congratulate Ben for me too. Only please don't be long. I'll be waiting for you." Harris tried to object, but then he left and disappeared for the whole weekend. He didn't even know that his wife had gone into labour and had been rushed to the hospital. Next to Helen was her mother. She did not say a word about her good-for-nothing son-in-law to her daughter, but Helen already saw everything with her eyes. "Mum, he'll come, you'll see. And everything's going to be okay. He didn't know Josh would be born in such a hurry. It's still 2 weeks away. And don't look at me like that. Harris and I are really doing great." Harris didn't show up until the day he was discharged. Helen immediately noticed the blue shadows under his eyes, and he hid a guilty look. "I'm sorry. My men and I learned that I became a father and could not stop to celebrate. Well, you understand. It's such an amazing occasion." Helen wanted to yell at her husband, but she held back and kept silent. After all, Harris's face shone with such happiness when he took their son in his arms that she immediately forgave him everything. She loved him sincerely and did not yet know how many times she would have to forgive him in the future. Her mother only shook her head and said, "No, you can't change my mind. I see what a bad husband you have, and he'll throw something else at you, as you'll see. But your son will be a good boy. Take care of him. You have a wonderful son." Josh was 17 when Helen's mother's prophecy came true. She herself did not live to the tragedy that happened to her daughter a few years later, and could not learn about what happened, but Helen always remembered that black day. However, it began quite ordinarily. Harris offered Helen to drive with him to his friend's cottage in the village. "We'll spend the weekend there. We'll have a barbecue, go to the sauna. Everything will be fine." "Harris, let's stay home. I don't feel very well. I don't want to go anywhere." "There you go again," exclaimed Harris. "Helen, aren't you tired of grumbling all the time? Do I rest that often? Or have I become an alcoholic, as your mother prophesied? No, I have a good position. I earn good money and I support my family quite well. Or do you need something?" Helen shook her head. "So why can't I get together with friends a couple of times a month and relax?" Harris raised his voice. Helen did not want to quarrel with her husband, so she hurried to calm him down. After all, Harris did not drink often. Maybe she was just overreacting and nagging him in vain. "All right, let's go," she said to her husband. "Only please don't drink too much. Tomorrow, Josh returns from the competition, and we need to meet him on the train." "We'll meet him, don't worry," Harris grumbled and promised, "and I won't drink. Well, maybe only a couple of cocktails." But once he was in the company of his friends, he completely forgot about his promise, and late in the evening, he headed for the car. "Are you crazy?" Helen asked, worried. "You've been drinking this afternoon, and you're still drunk. Let's sleep here, and tomorrow morning we'll go straight to the station." "I'm normal. I'm sober now, I can feel it. So let's go home." Harris tried to convince her. His friends supported him and laughed at the woman's fears. Helen was angry, swore, and refused to go. However, when Harris shouted at her in front of everyone, she cried and sat next to him. Nevertheless, her premonitions did not deceive her. While driving from the village where they were staying in the city, Harris drove normally, but he got disoriented in a large stream of cars and missed his exit on the first lap. Attempting to regroup, he cut someone else's car, confused the gas with the brake in fright, and crashed into a pole at tremendous speed. The impact was on the right side, where Helen was sitting. Shocked by what had happened, Harris got out of the car and began to inspect the damage, forgetting about his wife in the cabin. She lost consciousness from the painful shock because her legs were clamped in a vise of mangled iron. Witnesses called an ambulance, but in rush hour, the car had difficulty reaching the site. Time was hopelessly running out. When the rescuers cut the woman out of the car, they tried to get her to the hospital as quickly as possible. The surgeon did almost the impossible. He saved Helen's life, but could not save her legs. She remained an invalid for the rest of her life. Harris cursed himself for what happened and begged his wife to forgive him. He promised to quit drinking forever and swore that he would never leave her. However, 1 year passed and he packed his things and left his wife and son, declaring that he could not live like that anymore. "How could you?" Helen asked him with a disappointed look. "Can't you understand it yourself?" Harris boiled. "I constantly feel guilty in front of you. It's because of me that everything happened. How should I behave? I'm tired, okay? And in general, I'm sorry, but I found someone else. I love her, and I only want to be with her." "I hate you," Josh shouted, attacking his father with his fists. "Go away and never come back. We'll live without you. Understand?" Harris grinned, pushed his son away, and slammed the door behind him, cutting off everything that connected him with his family. Helen's heart always ached when she heard her son crying at night. But during the day, he never once showed her his weakness, and she let him get over his resentment toward his father. Time passed, and Josh became an adult, but he never left his mother. He took care of her, paid for her treatment, and made sure that she did not need anything. After work, he hurried home, forgetting that it was time for him to organize his personal life. This upset Helen, who was sure that it was because of her that he did not have relationships with girls. She tried to talk to her son, but he always answered her with a smile. "What are you saying, Mum? What does this have to do with you? I just haven't met the one I could love yet." And then one day a miracle happened. Once in the pharmacy, Harris did not have enough money to pay for his medicine. The pretty young cashier smiled at him and said, "I'll pay extra for you, don't worry. You'll be able to bring it back." "Thank you. I will definitely pay back the debt," promised Josh, and the next day he came to her with flowers. The girl's name was Faith. She willingly accepted Josh's courtship, gladly got acquainted with Helen, and sometimes came to visit them. Helen saw that they were in love with each other and was just happy for them. She liked Faith very much. It was immediately obvious that she was not spoiled, worked hard, was caring, and was very attentive to other people. "Son, are you and Faith serious?" asked Helen when they walked along the alley near their home park. "She's a good girl, but you never told me about your plans." Josh adjusted the plaid on his mother's lap and smiled. "Tomorrow I'll meet her parents. Faith has no father. He died when she was very young. Her mum lived alone for a long time. Then she met a man. They've been living together ever since." "So Faith was raised by her stepfather?" Helen asked. "It turns out so," said Josh, "but she speaks very well of him. She says he's kind and caring." "Well, that's good," Helen said. "They will like you very much, I know." The next evening, Josh went to Faith's house. When she opened the door, He handed her a bouquet of flowers and another one prepared for her mother. But suddenly the flowers fell out of his hands. Harris, Faith's stepfather, came out from the kitchen to meet the guest, and now he was looking at his son confusedly. Faith, not understanding anything, froze on the spot. "Josh, what's going on? Come on in, I'll introduce you." "No, I don't need it," Josh said, and Faith recoiled, seeing his face distorted with anger. "Why didn't you tell me this thing is your stepfather?" "What are you talking about? How dare you?" she said in confusion. "You have no right to be so rude and use such words." "He has the right to do that, Faith," Harris answered quietly. "I'm his father. It was because of me that Helen suffered and remained disabled for the rest of her life. I left her. I couldn't endure it. I broke down, and as you can see, Josh hasn't forgiven me." Realizing what was happening, Faith and her mother were aghast, and Josh angrily said, "You're not my father. You're a scumbag and a traitor. I don't want to know anything about you." He abruptly turned around and left. Faith rushed after him and caught up to him, but he snatched his hand away. "Go to your daddy, and I hate you all of you." Faith was frightened, thinking that he would hit her, and quickly covered her face with her hands. Josh, being in a rage, decided that she was as traitorous as his father, and therefore he could not stay a minute. Faith flinched when she heard the entrance door slam and realized Josh had left. She sank straight down on the dirty steps and burst into tears. Life had lost all meaning to her. At that time, Harris quietly came and sat down next to her, hugged her, and pressed her against his shoulder. "Don't cry, please. Just don't cry. Everything will get better. Everything will definitely get better." "You don't understand," the girl sobbed. "Josh and I will have a child. I didn't have time to tell him about it. I wanted to today, and now here it is. Tell me, what should I do? Am I guilty of something?" "It's not your fault," Harris said, "and Josh will realize it one day. I'll go to him and I'll talk to him. Do you want me to?" Faith nodded, but nothing came out of it. Josh did not talk to his father and did not allow him to say a word. Helen hurried to the angry voice of her son and burned her ex-husband with a cold look. "Leave, please." "Helen, just go away." Harris wanted to explain why he came, but Josh had already slammed the door in his face. Several years went by, and Helen saw with pain in her heart how her son's life was going downhill. After breaking up with Faith, he started drinking and ignored his mother's tears and pleas. Helen has only now realized what it means to be truly unhappy. Her beloved son was falling into the abyss before her eyes, and did not hear her words at all. One day when Josh came home drunk again, Helen could not stand it. Her hands trembled as she emptied some medicine onto her palm. "What are you doing?" Josh asked, entering the room with a cloudy look. "I don't want to live, Josh." Helen burst into tears. "I don't want to see you die. Look at what you've become. Why did you bring yourself to this? What do you want to prove to whom? You've ruined your life, and you're getting drunk before my eyes. I don't want to see this anymore and live like this," she said hysterically, and Josh could hardly hold her back. Mum, stop it. I'll pull myself together. Everything will be all right, do you hear? I'll get a job again and find a wife, and you will not regret that I am your son." Josh kept his word. He became a firefighter. However, he never got married. He fell in love with Marceline, a dispatcher at the fire station. He really liked her, but she turned out to be not so good when he brought her home. They lived together for only 3 months, and Josh separated from her because she did not want to share the domestic difficulties. She thought only about herself demanded constant attention, was jealous of Josh and his mother, and neglected housework. "I'll leave," shouted Marceline, "but you'll regret it, and one day crawl back to me. But I will not agree to be with you. Understand? Sit with your mum. You'll never get married. Never." "Okay, Marceline, but I don't care," sighed Josh. "Please go away." Once a private house on the edge of the city caught fire. Josh arrived with other firefighters and saw a little girl's silhouette in the window. She was screaming and waving, calling for help. Josh rushed to her and soon had her in his arms. To his surprise, she broke free and shouted, "Mum, my mum is there. She must be saved. She's not well. She's lying on the floor. Save her. Save my mum." Josh handed the girl to his partner and went back into the house. He quickly searched all the rooms, but did not find the girl's mother. Thick smoke covered his eyes, and fire engulfed all the rooms. The roof could collapse at any moment. Josh thought the girl was mistaken and there was no one there, but then he finally saw a female figure lying aside. Gasping and trying not to delay a second, Josh picked her up and moved toward the exit. Behind him, the roof began to collapse, and he made a final leap and fell into the arms of his comrades with the woman. "Josh, you scared us. We thought you would stay there," they said. At this moment, the woman was taken by doctors, and her daughter was crying nearby. "Mummy, Mummy!" Josh approached her to comfort her, but then looked at her mother and was stunned. It was Faith, his Faith. A few hours later, Josh sat in the hospital room next to Faith, holding her hand and listening to a sad story about how she lived all this time. "Your father has been dead for a long time. He outlived your quarrel by only 2 years. My mother left after him. I'm all alone with my daughter." "You got married?" Josh asked. "What makes you think that?" Faith replied. "Because you have a daughter." "She's our daughter. Her name is Hope. When you left me, I was pregnant." Josh fell on his knees in front of Faith's bed, begging for forgiveness for all the stupid things he had done. Soon, Faith was discharged, and she and Hope came to Josh's house. Helen laughed and cried with joy. She realized that happiness had returned with Faith and Hope in their home, and would never leave its walls.